So very pleased to be joined today by Rob Swanda, a recently minted Ph.D. Rob, what is your Ph.D. in?
Biochemistry.
And what was your particular zone of focus?
I focused on using mRNA to target cancer cells for cell death.
Excellent, which makes you a perfect person to appear on What's Next in Biotech. But the added bonus is Rob's interest in communicating about science, making science accessible, which is clearly a passion for Rob, and a successful passion at that, with his YouTube channel of talking about how mRNA vaccines work, having nearly 70,000 views, which in the world of videos about RNA is stratospheric. Where did this interest in communicating about science come from?
So I have always been very passionate about public presenting. Even from very young, I partook in this program throughout high school and even undergrad called mock trial. So it's actually kind of getting people ready for law school. And you get to learn a lot about public presentation and how to assert yourself, how to use the right language to, kind of tailor your story the way that you want people to understand it. And of course, I was a science major though, so I wasn't actually interested in going to law school, but I was interested in those techniques because I knew that there was this big gap between scientists who often have this great research that they're pushing out, but they get lost in the complex terminology and these mathematical formulas that the public doesn't necessarily always understand correctly. So I wanted to kind of bridge that gap a bit better in my own research moving forward, since I knew that I always wanted to pursue a PhD. I wasn't sure afterwards if I wanted to go into teaching or if I wanted to go into industry, but I knew that those skills of communication would be, they would come in handy so much because of this kind of disconnect that is common in the field. And that's where it started.
Let's talk a little bit about that disconnect. You've done a lot of thinking about this, and I know to be able to produce the number of videos you have with the level of views that they have, you have thought through this in a lot of ways. What are the things that most scientists are missing, or what is the advice you would give to them in terms of doing their presentations? Specifically, let's focus on your specialty, which is mRNA. What are the challenges with mRNA and talking about it, the mistakes that you see out there that you'd advise people to avoid or focus on?
Right. So the first part, right off the bat, oftentimes you see scientists or professionals kind of coming in at a very lecture-based style. I think that can sometimes turn an audience away. Not to say it's not effective for all, different types of communication, but if you're trying to reach the masses, I think you need to come in at a very personable level. People look at individuals who are a researcher, maybe they have a PhD, they have a MD, they kind of almost look at them as a public figure of higher authority. And for me, when I want to present the work, I want to come down to eye level. I don't want there to be any hierarchy of just because I studied science doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to understand it. I think there should be tons of mutual learning going on between. If you have a question, maybe that's a question I never thought of before because I didn't think of it from that angle because you have a different background than me. All of a sudden, then it gets my brain turning of, okay, well, now I need to pivot. How am I going to talk about it so that this person can better understand it? Or maybe so even I can better understand it if the question is, really that good.
And what are the big dangers if science is talked about in ways that is not accessible to the broader public? What is the danger? What is the risk we face?
I think that then people get scared. They get turned off. You use these very complex terms that an individual might not understand as just maybe the formula for a particular compound, but if you don't describe it in the correct way or in a simple way, it comes across pretty scary. There's plenty of terminology that comes, probably in other fields too that I'm not familiar with, and if I don't understand it, I kind of am like, maybe I didn't really get the grasp of that paragraph, or if I'm reading an article, or even when I'm reading a book, if they were using a terminology, I'm kind of like, and I don't know what it is, kind of turned off almost from understanding the whole picture, and then you're almost left with an incomplete puzzle. So you're missing some of these critical pieces for people to connect the dots, and then they connect the dots themselves, which might not always be correct. And I think that that's when we fall into miscommunication or like anti-science communication, where it kind of begins to evolve or get born, not to say that it's necessarily coming from somebody who is trying to cause harm, but if they misunderstood something and then they spread that misinformation, it just, we know.
So what you're saying in a way is the risk or the challenge is that if scientists and people who understand the science don't communicate it in a way that others can understand it, the questions or the gray areas, and there's lots of them, this is science, where this is an exploration, they will be filled in by others, and maybe not in a way that is true, and potentially in ways that are untrue and detrimental to the support of science even.
Absolutely. And I think that it's also important for sometimes scientists and medical professionals to say that they don't know the answer to a certain question. Like you said, science is always evolving. It's building off of itself. So sometimes we discover something down the road, and then it revamps this new area of research. But it's okay if we don't have all the answers right now, as long as people are honest and don't try to fill it in themselves to try to make people think that they have all the answers. Just to explain to them that it is ongoing. Things are always evolving, and we'll keep you updated as we have more information.
Interestingly, I find that also the self-doubt or the exploration element of science can often lead scientists to put elements of question around things that are relatively certain, but it's still a scientific theory in some level, and it sort of poses more problems than it solves.
That's also true. Yeah.
Specifically in terms of RNA, what are the areas where you think communication could be improved in your interactions? And maybe I'd love to hear what your interactions have been online. I mean, YouTube is famously a broad platform. Unfortunately, I've many have observed, not just me, it's also one that's filled with comments that are often wildly negative in a way that you don't see on other platforms. And I'm never quite sure why that is. But what is your personal experience? What have you learned about that, and how have you adapted to address those concerns that are raised by people putting comments on, for example, your own videos or comments you've seen elsewhere?
Right. So I will say that there is a lot of potential hate that you get when you do post information that others may not agree with, but you need to remember, why are you posting it? So for me, when I made the first video of how the mRNA vaccines work, I made that for the sole purpose of just educating the people in my family. So my mom, dad, brother, and my grandma. They are not scientists, but they knew that I studied mRNA. They had heard that term before. And actually, I think that them not being scientists improved my communication, because a lot of times I would practice presentations with them or try to explain to them, what have you been doing for the past 5 years? Why do you have to go in all the time? What is a cell? So having someone outside of your field that you can explain to, I think, is a huge benefit for you being a communicator. And finding somebody who is willing to listen and probe and ask questions, I think will just vastly improve the way that you communicate about your science, because then you learn how to make it understandable and what analogies you can use to mimic, what you're doing in the lab into real world settings. So I always keep that in mind whenever I'm reading comments that have negativity, because it served a purpose for those 4 people, and all 4 of them got vaccinated, are protected from from SARS-CoV-2, and that that's what mattered most to me. Anybody else after that, of course, like if I could educate, all 7 billion people in the world, that would be amazing. But anybody after that is just an added bonus. And then a lot of questions and follow-up videos came from them as well, saying like, okay, maybe even after they already got vaccinated, they said, well, now Delta's around. What is Delta? We're hearing like it has 500 mutations, and I'm like, no, it doesn't have 500 mutations, but let's talk about what these mutations actually mean. They think, does a mutation mean it's a completely new virus? And so that was another thing to step in to say like, look, a mutation is just an amino acid change, and then think, okay, how can I describe an amino acid change? So I use like the Lego block analogy. If you're going to pick up a small Lego piece, you're going to swap it for a large Lego piece. Well, that's going to change what, the final product you're trying to make is going to be. And then I think like they quickly got it right after that.
Okay, let's come to the analogies in a minute. And I'd love to hear some of the analogies that you have found useful in talking about it. Certainly in the industry, people use software, hardware. Some of them, I think the analogies actually get in the way of explaining. So I'd love to hear the ones that you found are best. But I think that what I found interesting about what you're saying is really you're encouraging the ability to speak about it, or a way of speaking about it that would work around the table at a family dinner.
Yes.
And having in mind that audience of 4, forget that audience of however many billions are on YouTube every day,
Right.
but just focus on that small audience. We can get clarity about what we need to speak about and how to talk to them. So let's come back to the specifically with mRNA. What are the areas that you found people are most confused with, and what are the ways that you found most useful to clarify?
Right. So I think that people were right off the bat concerned about mRNA affecting one's DNA. So a lot of people had heard the term DNA before, but very few, I think, have heard mRNA. Now it's like, you find it anywhere. So trying to differentiate the difference between mRNA and DNA was big to help people understand that this is not going to influence, your genetics. Honestly, if that was possible, I think that we would have solved a lot of different diseases by now. And then another misconception was individuals concerned of...
Sorry, on the RNA versus DNA, what is the specific analogy you found useful, or several analogies if there's several of them? What is some of the actual... Tell me, what's the difference between RNA and DNA?
Right, yeah, so I really just broke it down kind of how it, in a realistic manner. So how DNA is a double strand and RNA is single strand. So first, right off the bat, how are you gonna make one thing into 2 things? Second is that they use different building blocks. So, think of it like there's the 4-letter code for DNA, and then there's a 4-letter code for RNA, but they're not the same. So one uses T, one uses U, and they're not interchangeable. And then the third was where are they located inside of the cell. So, draw out a little picture of the cell, say okay, DNA is located here in the nucleus, but RNA is located here in the cytoplasm. Look, they're not even interacting. There's a barrier in between them. So, we have 3 points that we can highlight to show scientifically, they are not, even interacting. And I think a lot of that video was more on visuals, and I think people understood that better.
Okay, RNA versus DNA. What's another common challenge for people, or what do they raise about and I don't know, I'm looking at your list of most viewed. It's like how each vaccine works. You've gone Novavax, you've done Moderna, BioNTech.
Yep.
Is that what people look at, or are there deeper levels?
So I did describe the other vaccines because I was getting so many comments from especially people internationally who were saying, look, we're not going to have Pfizer, BioNTech, or Moderna available in our country, but we will have AstraZeneca. Could you describe that one? Or, there was, when the surge was happening in India, that's just when they were getting Sinopharm and Sinovac approved. And there was some individuals reaching out how does that work? And even though that's not my area of expertise, I felt like I could describe it in a way that people could still understand. So I described each of the different ones. So the viral vector vaccines used by AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, and the protein-based vaccine used by Novavax, and then the attenuated viruses used by Sinopharm and Sinovac have all been described there.
The joys of home working.
Yeah.
I just walked in the middle of the Zoom recording.
That's okay. But I think that one of the other big concerns that was I don't know, the video on YouTube didn't actually get a lot of attention for this particular topic, but when I posted it on Twitter, it did get a lot of attention, and in a positive way, not in the negative comments, was how the mRNA vaccines will not affect a woman's fertility, because that was a very big myth that was circulating. I don't really know how it started or why it started, but basically saying that the spike protein is very similar to a placental protein. And the way I described it in the video was, look, a placenta is not made of one protein. Your body is not made of just one protein. You have millions of proteins around, and they're all different sizes. They all have different functions. Let's actually look at this protein that's supposed to be similar to the spike protein, and then we looked at the amino acid changes. I actually have a friend who's a chemist. She did a blast analysis of the whole spike protein versus syncytin 1, and they then did an overlap that I could show right there on Twitter in a tweet, in a picture, to say this is what you're saying looks like this, but where do you see the similarities? And so I think that one went over well, just on a different platform, but that was a big concern that I remember reading a lot about, and I still think people are concerned about it too. Again, maybe it's just something that they don't understand completely, so they are hesitant about something that they're worried for their own health.
Okay, which is an interesting point you're raising in terms of the platforms. Is there a big difference that you're seeing between the platforms in terms of what sort of conversations take place there? And any sort of insight into that is interesting, i.e., are there more angry comments on YouTube versus Twitter? Or is one more liable to bring productive conversation? And what is your evolution in terms of the platforms you're looking to?
So I think that definitely, unfortunately, YouTube brings the most amount of negativity. And however, it also brings in individuals who are, they've subscribed, they're looking for the new content, and they like it or they share it, but they don't necessarily always write oh, this was great, thank you. It's just more oh, I viewed it, I learned the knowledge, I'm moving on. Whereas I think you're much more likely to get a negative person to leave a comment rather than to just let it go. And on Twitter, I think it's a bit different, only because you can have the text interaction with other people. And I often get a lot of different positive comments back, and then also interactions with other physicians or other scientists who are oh, I didn't think about it in this way, or oh, this is a great way to explain it, I'm going to use this to teach my patients. Additionally, on Twitter, I am able to follow much more easier. I can just quickly scroll through and see okay, what are these people talking about in 1 minute, rather than subscribing and watching a ton of videos on YouTube. And you see that there's different communication styles. So my communication style is different than what some other scientists, epidemiologists, medical physicians are doing. And that's okay. Maybe a different style works for other people. Some are very blunt. Some come from a very empathetic point of view. Some are pushing mandates to get people vaccinated. Whatever someone's style is, you're going to find someone there on Twitter to follow if that's the type of content you want, which I don't think you can find as easily on YouTube.
In terms of what you're doing, which is really in your YouTube channel heading says it all, making science accessible, who are your heroes in terms of that? Who do you admire? Who do you think does that really well? And even outside, or even preferably outside of the domain of what biotech, et cetera. Who do you think does that well?
Yeah. So, growing up, I was always watching Bill Nye. So gotta say, gotta throw his name out there, Bill Nye the Science Guy. Always watched him growing up, and I can't say for sure, like, oh, if that was memorable enough to me to leave an impression, but since I, can remember those videos and watching him and making science fun and accessible, I think that did leave, an imprint in my mind of something that I want to aspire to. Additionally, like, although this is fictional, I still think it had a huge impact was the show CSI, so Crime Scene Investigation. I was like very obsessed with that growing up, and I think that the fictional characters that they had in that show actually really described the science of what's going on. Even if the science was like not accurate, they did it in a way that made the viewer understand like what processes they were doing. So not a real world example, but still an example enough to be like, okay, like I can follow along this TV show that is doing these complex things, and and then at the end, you have your drama and the solve and everything like that. But that was super helpful for me. And then since making these videos, there's been so many people that maybe they don't have a huge name, but there's been a lot of people online that I've been able to follow and learn from them in their communication styles. And that's just, it only makes it better for me. Like, I can see what they're doing that's working, what they're doing that maybe I think I could improve on, and, just bouncing off ideas too. Like, people will often send me an idea of, say, oh, I've been seeing a lot of questions about this. This would be a good idea for a video. And then, we just formed a connection right there, and we can keep that connection growing. So I think that is.
And are there many people you've connected with through this process that you've now developed more of a relationship with?
Yeah, definitely. Like, even like, there's definitely people who, like, I can have a phone call with them, or I can send them a message and say, like, oh, what do you think about this video? What do you think about this topic? I started to do like some blogs, started working with a couple nonprofits just to like be able to increase information. Like, for example, I worked with Project N95, where we talked about face masks and why those face masks are actually helpful and why they're stopping the virus. So like, that was a connection that was completely made all on Twitter. And then actually, when these videos started to leak into LinkedIn, that led me to the job that I will be starting this coming month. So like, future science communicators or scientists out there, if you're pursuing your master's, PhD, whatever, you never know where your next job opportunity is going to come from.
And what is that job?
So I'll be working for BD, Becton Dickinson, which is a medical device technology company, and I'll be in their technology leadership development program. And it will be like basically doing 3 rotations around different business units and working on different projects throughout 5 years to really learn like everything that's ongoing, build connections within the company, and hopefully be able to maybe like launch some products or be involved in product development. I'm just really excited about the opportunity that they have, especially because if you got a COVID vaccine, most likely a BD needle was what was used to inoculate you.
Excellent.
Yeah, so it kind of comes full circle, I guess.
So I guess to wrap it up, what would be your top tips to somebody looking to communicate not about science but about mRNA? What are the top things, having seen all of it? How many comments have you received total on all of your videos, do you think?
Oh my, at least several thousand.
Okay, from the thousands of comments you've received and the interactions you've had, what are the top tips, pieces of advice you would offer to somebody trying to communicate, maybe to their family around the Thanksgiving table? What is this mRNA stuff?
So, first tip I would say is that communication can come in a variety of different styles. So stay true to you. For me, that is public communication and talking through voice, but you can communicate other ways as well. There's a lot of individuals who use science communication maybe through artwork or even I have a friend who does it through crocheting. She talks about different microbes and crochets them and then gives a little description about, almost like a photo shoot of it, and gives a description, and you're teaching people about it in a fun way. So first tip is like find what works for you, because standing in front of a camera and maybe giving a speech isn't necessarily what works for everyone. But then again, like if I was to try to get up there and paint like an artwork, I probably wouldn't be very good at that either. So, figure out what works best for you to get your point across. And second is, like we mentioned before, make sure you have like an audience that doesn't understand what you're doing, and try to see if when you give that presentation, if they understand, and then what were the parts that they were getting held up on, and then how can you kind of smooth out those edges. And it takes time. I think you have to practice and revamp some of these like analogies that you want to use, or ways that individuals can understand it, putting it into context of what they're going to understand. And then lastly, like although you may get negative comments, don't think that people that are asking maybe simple or naive questions have a bad intention. And you might get those questions often. I mean, this was a vaccine that was going to be distributed to every person around the world, hopefully, if we want to, end the virus spreading around. So how many people in the world actually know about mRNA? There's probably not that many. So yeah, maybe you answered someone's question once, but then the next person in line might have the exact same question, and you can't get frustrated. And I think that that's also something that I began to see, like a little bit of burnout from scientists or medical physicians a couple months after these vaccines were rolling out, is that they were like frustrated, like, why don't you understand it? Like we've been talking about this for months, and you have to recognize that some people haven't been talking about it for months. Some people don't have the infrastructure that we all have to have access to internet and read news articles on the daily and scroll through Twitter and have time to watch videos. So maybe like they're finally coming around to trying to learn about it, and treat it like each person is brand new, and try to bring that energy and that positivity that you can to each comment or question, because I know I'm a big believer that you make better strides with sugar rather than with salt. So
excellent. So those are three great points, which is 1, stay true to yourself. Good advice in life in general. Number 2, listen to your audience and take feedback from them. And 3, don't take it personally if they don't understand what you're talking about, or ask the same question you've answered 1,000 times, because when you've had 68,000 viewers, many of the people who are seeing that video had never heard of RNA vaccines potentially until they were on that video at all.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you so much. Those are some fantastic tips.
Yeah, no problem.